Okay, so, there's been a lot of talk lately about Pi Network.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
got this huge user base, and people are really watching to see what happens with it now that it's on some exchanges.
Right.
And we've got some great data here
Yeah.
about how it's been performing on those exchanges and, the whole will it, won't it thing with Binance.
Yeah, Binance is the big question everyone's asking.
So in this deep dive, I'm hoping we can, really get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on with Pi.
Absolutely.
Where does it stand right now? What do those numbers on the exchanges really mean? And what's the deal with all the Binance speculation?
Right. Is there anything to it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then looking ahead, what are some of those make or break factors for Pi? Is it going to take off or fizzle out?
Yeah, try to cut through some of the noise and make sense of it all.
Right, because there is so much hype out there.
There is. You've gathered some really interesting stuff here. And for everyone listening, what we want to do is go beyond those surface level headlines.
Yeah.
Really dig into those dynamics that are at play so that you can understand not just what's happening, which, obviously we'll talk about, but why it might be happening
Yeah,
and what it could mean moving forward.
that's perfect.
So,
So Pi Network is out there right now trading on a few different platforms. So where should we be looking? What are the key players right now?
so the main exchanges where you're going to find Pi being traded are OKX, Pinex, Bitkit, Gate.io, and MEXC.
Okay.
And on these exchanges, the most common way to trade it is with USDT.
Okay, and for people who don't trade a lot, can you just quickly explain what USDT is?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. USDT is essentially just a type of cryptocurrency that's designed to maintain a stable value. So it's often used as kind of a way to move in and out of other cryptocurrencies.
Okay, so it's like a stable point of reference.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got those exchanges. Which one is seeing the most action? Where's the Pi party happening?
The real standout in terms of activity is Gate.io. Yeah, they are seeing much higher trading volumes than the others, something like $132 million worth of Pi changing hands in the last 24 hours.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and what that tells us is that there's a pretty significant amount of interest in Pi on that particular platform.
Makes you wonder what's driving all that.
Right, exactly. Why there?
Yeah, 132 million. So how did the other exchanges stack up against that? Is OKX even close?
OKX is also pretty active. There's definitely a lot of trading happening there.
Okay.
But it's interesting to look at the liquidity because it's not all about pure volume.
Right.
So when we talk about something like 2% market depth, what we mean is how many buy and sell orders are there within 2% of the current price of Pi.
Okay, so it's like a measure of how much Pi is ready to be bought or sold right now.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And on OKX, that range is between, let me see here, roughly $33,000 on the low end and $60,000 on the high end.
Okay.
So while there's definitely trading happening there, this lower depth means that larger trades could potentially have a bigger impact on the price.
Okay, so if someone comes in and wants to buy or sell a big chunk of Pi, it could really swing things on OKX more than on Gate.io.
Exactly, because on a more liquid market like you're seeing on Gate.io, there are more orders waiting at different price points, so those larger orders get absorbed more easily.
Gotcha. Okay, so Gate.io for volume, OKX is a bit more sensitive. What about those other exchanges you mentioned, Bidget, Pinex, and MEXC? Are they even worth talking about?
Right now, they're definitely smaller players compared to those big two.
Okay.
But there are signs that they are gaining some traction as well, and Pinex in particular, is known for offering these automated trading bots.
Oh, interesting.
So that might be appealing to people who want a more hands-off approach to trading or want to try out certain strategies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we all know crypto can be a wild ride.
Oh, tell me about it.
What has Pi been doing, price-wise, since it hit these exchanges?
Well, there have been some pretty dramatic swings.
I bet.
Right after it got listed on some of those exchanges, the price jumped up to around $2.10.
Wow.
But then really quickly, we're talking within 24 hours,
Oh, no.
it crashed down over 62% to about 73.7 cents.
Oof. That'll make you dizzy.
It definitely highlights the risk, that comes with trading these assets, especially when they're new or have low liquidity.
You said low liquidity again. I feel like we need to break this down a bit more because it seems really important.
It's really crucial. So imagine this. If there aren't that many people buying and selling at different price points,
Okay.
then it's much easier for a single large trade to really move the price. you know?
It's like a seesaw with only a couple of kids on each side.
Exactly.
One jumps off and the other two goes flying up?
Yeah, with low liquidity, if someone decides to sell a large amount of pie, there might not be enough buy orders waiting there to absorb that without the price dropping significantly.
Okay, so it's kind of susceptible to manipulation then.
Yeah, exactly. A big player could come in
Yeah.
and really push the price around.
Okay, that makes total sense. Now, speaking of things that can move the price, didn't Pi have that open network launch recently? How did that play into things?
Yeah, that was a big moment for Pi back on February 20th of this year.
Right.
It basically meant that for the first time, users could move their Pi out of the Pi Network app into their own external wallets.
Okay.
So you can imagine that generated a lot of excitement. People finally had more control over their Pi.
Right.
But the flip side is that it also meant that a lot of that Pi that had been mined was suddenly available to be sold on exchanges.
Oh, so it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It brought functionality and excitement,
Right.
but also potentially increased the selling pressure, which could lead to more price volatility.
Okay, so we've got Pi trading on these exchanges, some interesting volume on Gate.io,
Right.
but also these challenges with the price swinging around and the whole low liquidity thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the big one, the one everyone wants to know about, Binance.
All right, let's get into it.
What's going on with that? Is Pi ever going to be listed there?
There are a lot of rumors flying around, but one thing I want to make clear right away is that it's not because Pi has its own blockchain that it's not on Binance.
Really?
Yeah, Binance lists plenty of cryptocurrencies that run on their own independent networks. Think Bitcoin or Litecoin.
So if it's not the blockchain, what's holding it back?
Well, the main roadblock seems to be related to Binance's Vote to List campaign and how Pi works with the BNB Smart Chain.
Okay.
There was a community vote, and a huge majority, something like 86%, voted for Binance to list Pi.
Oh, wow, they really want it.
They do,
Yeah.
but Binance made it very clear that that vote was just for reference.
Okay.
It didn't guarantee a listing, and the real issue seems to be technical.
Oh.
Pri's network just isn't built in a way that meets the requirements for projects to participate in that vote to list thing.
Ah, so even with all that support, it might not happen because of technical reasons.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a bummer for the Pi community who came out in force for that vote.
Yeah, I bet. So what does it mean for Pi that it's not on Binance? Like, what's the real impact there?
Well, to put it simply, it's a missed opportunity. Binance is the biggest crypto exchange out there by far.
Right.
Getting listed there would mean tons of new users, potentially. It could really boost the liquidity, which we've talked about,
Right.
and it would lend a lot of credibility to Pi in the eyes of the mainstream. But I will say this, the fact that Pi has such a large and active community, I mean, there are over 70 million users now.
It's a lot of people.
It is, and that's something that a major exchange like Binance can't just ignore. That's a huge potential market.
Yeah. It would be hard to pass up.
So, while it's not a guarantee,
Right.
it's definitely something that could sway things in the future.
Okay, so Binance is still a maybe, but there are some pretty big concerns out there about Pi Network too, right? Like how transparent is the project really, and how much trust is there within the community?
Yeah, a lot of people have raised those points, and it's important to address them.
Absolutely.
One of the main issues is the lack of clarity about how Pi Network is funded. There hasn't been a lot of public information released about where their financial backing is coming from.
Well, it's not a good look.
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
No, and to make matters worse, there's not a clear roadmap available publicly that shows what their plans are for the future.
Right.
And when you consider that there is something like 19 million users who have gone through that KYC verification process, where they hand over personal information,
Mm,
it starts to raise some eyebrows, like why so secretive about the money and the plans?
totally. So transparency is kind of key in the crypto world, right? Like people want to know what's going on.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about trust. And how about the technical side of things? Did you find any information about that?
Yeah, and that seems to be another area of concern.
Yeah.
Pi is being described as a centralized network, and what's really worrying is that the code isn't open source.
Yeah, that's definitely a red flag for a lot of people.
Right. Because most cryptocurrencies are open source. So anyone can look at the code, audit it, verify it.
Exactly. It's all about transparency.
Right.
But with Pi's code being closed, it raises questions about security, functionality, the whole thing.
Yeah, like a black box.
It is.
Yeah.
And you compare that to something like Ethereum, where every single line of code is available for anyone to scrutinize.
Huge difference.
That's a big difference.
So you've got this huge community of Pi believers on one side, but then these serious questions about funding and transparency on the other.
Right. And that's the real tension here.
Yeah, how does that play out? Like, is the Pi community aware of these concerns?
Well, within that 70 million strong user base, there's definitely a strong belief in Pi. They really think it's going to be huge.
Okay.
But outside of that core group, there's definitely skepticism. For
Right.
example, the CEO of Bybit, which is a well-known exchange, he publicly called Pi a potential Ponzi scheme.
Whoa, that's a pretty big accusation.
Yeah, and he pointed to the fact that Pi uses a multi-level marketing type structure and really pushes recruiting new users.
So he's basically saying it's all about getting new people in and not about real value.
Right, and it feeds into those concerns about whether Pi is sustainable in the long term.
So it's not just random people on the internet raising concerns, it's coming from people at the top of the crypto world.
Yeah, and just to add to that whole trust issue,
Okay.
our sources mentioned that huge $1.4 billion Ethereum hack on Bybit.
Right, that was insane.
It was massive, and while Pi wasn't directly affected, that kind of event really shakes people's confidence in the whole crypto space.
Yeah, for sure. It makes everyone a lot more cautious.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the market dynamics around Pi.
Sure.
What are the analysts saying? What might the future hold for this thing?
Well, as we've talked about, the price has been all over the place, going from over $2 down to under 75 cents.
Yeah, that's not exactly stable.
Not at all. And that volatility seems to be driven by a few things. The initial excitement when it got listed, some early miners taking profits, and of course that low liquidity issue we've discussed.
Right, and it sounds like sentiment is pretty divided.
Yeah, there are the bulls who are really focused on that massive user base. They see that as a huge plus.
Right.
And then you've got the bears who are worried about the instability and the lack of transparency.
So basically, nobody really knows what's going to happen.
Pretty much. It's interesting to note that when the mainnet actually went live, the price dropped 62%.
Really?
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of those early adopters were quick to cash out.
Okay, so what are the analysts actually predicting for Pi? Are there any price targets out there?
Well, there are some predictions floating around, but it's important to take them with a grain of salt.
Of course. It's all speculation.
Exactly. Some of the more optimistic analysts are saying Pi could reach $40 to $200 by the end of 2025.
Wow, that's a huge range.
Yeah, and those projections are based on the assumption that Pi will see widespread adoption.
Right, like people actually using it for everyday transactions.
Exactly. They're also assuming it'll gain real-world utility, so not just trading it, but actually using it for something.
Oh, okay.
Bitget, one of the exchanges, has a more specific prediction. They're saying around $115 by 2026.
Okay, a little more concrete, but still a long way off.
It is. And their prediction hinges on the development of a strong Pi ecosystem.
So like dApps and stuff, things that make Pi useful.
Exactly. So the main takeaway here is that all of these bullish predictions rely on Pi delivering on its promises, building those dApps, getting integrated with wallets, and navigating the regulatory landscape without getting tripped up.
Okay, so adoption, ecosystem, regulation, those are the big three to watch.
Absolutely. Those are going to be crucial for Pi's success.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Can we just do a quick recap for the listeners? Like, where do things stand right now with Pi?
Sure. So basically, Pi Network has managed to get itself listed on a handful of cryptocurrency exchanges, and Gate.io is seeing the most action right now.
Okay.
But across the board, the liquidity is pretty low, which is contributing to those big price swings.
Right, and that Binance listing that everyone's hoping for is still up in the air.
Yeah, it's a big question mark. There's a lot of community support, but those technical requirements are a hurdle. And then we have the big transparency question. The lack of information about funding and the closed source code, that's creating a trust issue for some, even with that massive user base.
Okay, so for anyone out there thinking about trading Pi or just really curious about it, what are some key things to keep in mind based on what we've talked about today?
So if you're going to trade Pi, definitely use limit orders.
Okay.
That way you have more control over the price, and you can avoid any nasty surprises with those big price swings.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Stay informed. Follow the official announcements from both Pi Network and the exchanges. News can change things really quickly.
Yeah, no kidding.
And most importantly, remember that Pi, like a lot of these newer cryptocurrencies, is a high-risk investment.
Right.
Do your research. Only invest what you can afford to lose.
Absolutely.